Another aspect is this energetic transmission, which I absolutely felt from this book. I mean, I can't tell you how many quotes and some of your articles I keep emailing to everyone and I'm just feeling this, oh my God, this is incredible. It's very uplifting and expanding. And so I am feeling a shift from the text. And then, so a couple of questions from that, but one would be, I feel that they are looking at us primarily as if we are energetic beings. And that is really fundamentally the way we operate in the world and the way things happen with us, which is that's a shift for us to think of ourselves in that regard. I mean,
I think that's true. I think they don't discount our humanity at all. I mean, they acknowledge our divinity and give us full permission to be claiming it and to be demonstrating it. And demonstrating it means experiencing it, manifesting in a way that we can know. I think that's very important. And I think, yes, we're energetic beings. I mean, one of the things that I do, I work as a psychic or as an empath as well, and that's part of my work. And I didn't realize I could do any of this stuff until I was doing it, until I started hearing other people. When I would have my hands on them, I would begin to hear stuff for them. And now I don't need to touch anybody. I can just tune in usually by name, and I can just begin to access information. And what I began to realize was that I was operating telepathically. We're all in communication. I was channeling at the Esalen Institute. It was the first time I ever channeled outside of my apartment, and there was a physicist there at the same conference, and Dean Radin. And I said to him, because I thought, if I'm tuning into somebody in China, I'm going to China. And he said, no, you're not going to China. You're going within. I mean, you're going through. There's another way through it. So my assumptions of how things worked at that point were still fairly moored in what I understood about my physical reality. And that's not the way it works. So if I can step into your sister, say, and I step into her by name, and then I start to look like her, which is what happens with me, and I might take on, some of her symptoms or her expressions, and then tell you what's going on and the dynamic between the two of you because I'm hearing her. That means that we're not just the physical body. We're operating in many, many different levels. I needed that in order to trust some of the other stuff. I was raised pretty much an atheist. I'm still skeptical. I can be skeptical about anything, including what comes through me some days, going, what the hell is this? However, I continue to show up because I've been given continually proof along the way to keep me going. I needed that. This isn't wishful thinking. It's just not the way it works. In fact, I had a much more comfortable life in some ways before I was sort of doing this because my world had boundaries and parameters that were structured and formed and I had grown up with. And that's not the world I live in anymore. It's not the world we live in, frankly. I think the fact that it's possible that we can communicate beyond the systems that we've been brought up to learn through means that nothing is the way we thought. We're not just our bodies. If we're not just our bodies and consciousness isn't localized in the physical body, then what is it and how do we communicate? If we're all connected, the internet's really interesting to me, I started reading on the internet, when I was first playing with opening up psychically, and I loved it because I could tune into somebody named, sexygirl431 at AOL.com, and I knew I had a 70-year-old man. I knew it. He smelled of cigar smoke, and I'm saying, what's going on? You're 70. He'd say, and it was very funny. But I realized that in an amazing way, we were all sort of dealing through consciousness there. There weren't bodies,
Right.
And it was sort of a game changer. I think the kids coming through now. I did an event in New York last night, and there were these, 20-somethings there, these very sweet kids, and they're very aware, and they're not carting in some of the baggage that we had. It's sort of, maybe it's because so many of the systems that my generation was supposed to trust in, like you're going to have a job when you get out of school, have failed. That they're really looking at things from a very different lens. And it seems to be a lens that's a lot more community-based than, I ever did. And I think that's an amazing thing, but it gives me great hope about how we can all sort of operate as one.
Yes. They seem to be cleaner and more confident, a little more straightforward, and they're just going to go do this, do that. One of the things about this vibration, back to this energy and this vibration that your guides say, and then I'm going to actually read this quote so you'll know what they said. They said, "Your vibration, we say, which is sound and concentrated energy, has the power to displace any wall, any obstacle that you may have known." Now that's very powerful. And I think that, so do you know how to explain that at all?
I mean, again, I have to ask them. And I mean, maybe I can. I got them before. I know, and I mean, I know one of the teachings that's in this new book, and it's a big teaching. And it sounds like a simple one, but for me, it's a big one. I mean, one of their teachings is that anything is possible, and that until we believe that something is possible, it cannot be made manifest. And so many of the things that we were told cannot be so, we continue to claim as impossible because we're affirming the impossibility of it in our consciousness. Once you decide that something is possible, you've changed your relationship to it. Suddenly it can be so. The possibility of it allows you to claim it or to move into accord with it. Do you understand this? So, when I grew up, it was impossible for me to do some of the stuff that I do now. When I was in my mid-20s, early 30s is when I studied healing, and it was when I was opening up originally in some significant ways. I watched this woman who was a healing teacher of mine in those days stand before a room of people. She was an old Irish lady with bright red hair, and very ordinary in some ways and very extraordinary in others. And she said to this entire room of people, "Ask for one thing, you're going to get it." And we all asked for something. And this energy came into the room that was just rocked me. I mean, I felt like I was under a current. And I looked at her, and what she gave me in that moment, and I'll always be grateful for this truly, was the awareness that this could be so, that something like this could happen, because this was not the way I grew up. And I could feel it, and I knew it. And what she showed me was that the world was much larger than I thought it could have possibly been. And I think that what they're talking about in that quote is that, but I also think that they're telling us that we're much, much, much more powerful than we've ever been given permission to be. And until we start reclaiming that, we're going to be operating in a limited way. The guides talk about frames a lot, and they say we operate with a limited frame, and the purpose of a frame in many ways is to keep things in and to exclude what's around it. And what's being excluded is massive. It's everything else beyond the small identity. Hi, my name is Paul. I live in New York. I have a dog. That's the small self. The bigger self is much more able, I think, to claim the larger.
Yeah. Well, they talk about the lie, which is fascinating to me, as if we have been lied to by other people, by government, by the structures that exist around us, and then we're still sort of beholden to that still. Do you know anything more about that? I mean, who has been lying to us?
Well, I think we've been lying to ourselves, that we've bought this thing for so long that we continue to replicate it.
Yeah.
I think that we're perfectly accountable to that. Where it started, I don't know. That's not the teaching. I don't know. Maybe they get it. I don't remember. It may be in the book if they get into it. But they talk a lot about, well, here's one thing. I'll go with this one. And I don't want to offend anybody with this, but I was doing a workshop in San Francisco this year, maybe end of last year. And the workshop happened to be in a convent building that had been retired and was now an artist collective. It was a lovely place called the Center. And halfway through the workshop, they said to the collected group, they said, many of you can only go so far. And you are essentially being stopped by a false belief that really tethers you to a rock. You can only lift so high. You can't get beyond this. And they said what the belief is original sin, that you're inherently bad and unworthy.
Wow.
And they did a clearing on original sin. It almost knocked me over in the middle of the room. And afterwards, I said, how many of you are Catholic? Most of the room was Catholic. There was a nun in the workshop. She wasn't, wearing a habit, but
Right.
it was, and it was a big deal for people. So the belief that we're not an aspect of the Creator, that we're separate from, that we have to go to somebody else to have access for that, or have permission, or inherently bad, is a huge thing. I came into this work, my awakening in many ways in 1987 when I started to open up, was in response to a lot of catastrophe all around me. My life was a mess. I was a year out of graduate school. I was drinking too much. I was miserable. People around me were dying of AIDS right and left. New York was a war zone. I didn't come into this stuff because, it's time to get spiritual. I came into this stuff out of sheer necessity.
Right.
And when I saw what people were going through, people who believed that they were going to hell, who were dying because they were bad. I mean, what a horrible thing to espouse and to teach. But we've all claimed this stuff. We've all gone into agreement. I mean, the guides say again and again in their books, what you judge, you fear. And look at what you judge and you'll see what you're afraid of, And I know that's true for me because I can be as judgmental as the next guy. And if I take a moment to see why I'm judging, I'm usually frightened of something.
Yeah.
I have an investment in that. But who lied to us? I don't know. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Other people go into that stuff. But I think that there's a long legacy of our allowing ourselves to be told we are not worthy.
Mm-hmm. And they call this a plane of fear, but they do say we are awakening from this plane of fear. Yeah,
you know the book better than I do, I'll tell you.
I know it really well because I was so fascinated, and so I'm underlining it. But then when I'll reread parts of it and go, oh my God, I get something new entirely. Because I do find that really digesting it. I mean, again, it's that energetic transmission, but it sort of has to become who you believe you are.
Yeah. And
then from that standpoint, you can move forward. With that new truth, and again, it's such a hopeful place for us to be. What have you learned about love in all this work with these guides?
Oh, that's such a hard question for me because it's the one place where I feel that in some ways, whenever they start to go about love and go on, I go, oh no, because I feel even though the whole second book, the Book of Love and Creation, is really about that, I feel like it's the teaching that isn't landing for me personally. But the amazing thing is I am starting to get it. In a very personal way. Now, I understand from what they teach, that love isn't an emotion, love isn't a feeling, love is a state of consciousness and a frequency. They say that we're all radios and we're always in broadcast. And what we broadcast in many ways is our consciousness. And, if what we're broadcasting isn't working for us, we have the right to change the channel. And love is the frequency that they speak to. I know in my own experience of love, which is an interesting one, I've been a college teacher since I was in my mid-20s, so it's really, half my life I've taught this. And I realized at a certain point, I took last semester off from teaching college, to be on tour with the book, and I really missed it. And I thought I'd be so relieved. I missed it. But I realized, teaching, and I know this in my bones, teaching, any good teaching is an act of love. Any of it is. And it's all about seeing sort of the amazing potential in those people before you and seeing what they can be realized as. Not that where they are is wrong, but just seeing their capacity to learn and to grow into that. And my classes for years it was just like being in that vibration all the time. I loved it. When I'm doing workshops and I'm channeling, my guides are much more expressive than I am. They'll go around and look people in the eye and stroke people on the cheek. And, I'm going, oh, my God, I don't believe this is like, they'll hug people. I'm like, oh, my God, that's not me. I'm not necessarily much of a hugger, but they are. And that frequency is very, very present.
Yeah.
But I'm a little bit receded. When I'm channeling, it's kind of like the guides are driving the car and I'm in the back seat hanging over, trying to make sure, because I worry that we're not going to crash into a wall, and they just keep shutting me up and keep going about their business. I mean, that's the relationship. Mm-hmm. So the teaching of love is something that I'm working with experientially. I was on a plane. It was very funny, I was on my way to Esalen last year because I teach there now every summer. I do workshops there. And I thought this plane was going down. The turbulence was so bad. The flight attendants were looking green. And I went, oh, no, this is it. I'm not even going to get to go soak in a hot tub at Esalen. I'm going down in the plane. For some reason on that, in the middle of that turbulence, I started to think of all of those moments in my life where I have been so self-condemning, and punishing and unforgiving of myself. And it was almost like I had a mini life review. And I just kept thinking, I really love myself for having lived through that. I got through that thing that I thought was so horrible that I would never get through, or that memory that was so shameful that I would shudder when I think of, how I put my foot in my mouth or whatever. And it was in that moment that I really kind of got the whole concept of self-love, which I always used to think was like a slogan or a happy face smile. It was like, I get it, but I don't get it, and I get it, and it seems convenient. But I really got the importance of it.
Yeah.
The guides work, you see, this is what the guides say about love. I mean, this is what the guides say. And everybody says the same thing. You got love and you got fear. And which one do you want to be operating in? And the guides say pretty simply, every choice you've ever made because you were afraid has gotten you more fear. And they just say, look at your own lives for the evidence of that. And that's been very true for me. And one of the things, and I said I'm not their best student, that I've been very good at is learning not to make my choices based in fear most of the time. Sometimes I still do, and I end up paying for it pretty quickly because the backlash, once is pretty immediate. Like if I'm worried about you not approving of me, so I go to find out if I'm still approved of, on a whatever, in a relationship, in a friendship or whatever, that's my acting in fear. Do you understand? And I'll get the rebound. But I found that as I don't do that, my life has gotten better and better and better and better. And then I can move more into that accordance with the frequency of love. But am I living there all the time? Not personally, not yet. I'd like to.
I do find that there's a couple of gaps in terms of, kind of where we want to be and where we are. And then maybe there's fear in the middle. So people will talk about, especially around here in the company that I keep, because we are on this sort of spiritual path and wanting to realize this. But there can also be then, but I've got to worry about how this is going to come together over here. And it has often, of course, to do with finances. So, in that case, we are bringing that fear into the picture.
Well, my guides would say that's choice. Choice. They really, you want to do that, you can do that. You want to worry, you can worry. That's your choice. They're not going to judge it.
Yeah.
We have our human experience here. We can do that, but we get the benefits of what we claim. So, I mean, I've been a worrier most of my life, and I'm much, much better than I used to be, but I worry about everything. And I don't worry about everything, anymore. I worry about some stuff, but that's all my need to control outcome. My worry is all about control, and frankly, it's about not trusting enough that I'm loved and I'm cared for, and, that I'm not going to be led to the right choice, that I have to figure it all out. The guides that I work with are very big on teaching knowing. And they say, thinking and knowing are two different things. Whenever you think something, I think I know what I'm having for dinner tonight. I think my partner loves me. I think my dog's okay with the dog sitter. There's still a level of question attached to it. When you know something, there's really no question. When you're operating in your knowing, you're never afraid. And I really found this to be true is astonishing. When you know something, you're never afraid. I mean, the funny thing is, it's like getting a hard diagnosis from a doctor. when you hear the diagnosis, it's the fear of getting the diagnosis that's so frightening. Once you have it, that's not frightening. What may be frightening is what you have to do to deal with it. You know what I mean? Which is, again, projection into the future. How am I going to deal with this? In this book, the guides use this claim: I know who I am, I know what I am, I know how I serve. And they say that it brings us into present time, which is the only time we can know anything. They say you don't know anything yesterday, you can't know tomorrow, you can only know now. So if you work with this, they say, and you can actually feel the energy. Very often people feel their hands and their feet get hot because it feels almost like the energy is just coming straight down you. When they do that in my workshops, it's very profound. Everybody can sort of feel it. But they say it works for everybody. So I know who I am, I know what I am, I know how I serve, gives you the opportunity at least to choose from your knowing and not out of a reactive place, which can be the place that's born in fear or in habituated behavior. Like, oh my God, my mother's coming. It's always hard when my mother comes. It's going to be hard again. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Which is, again, we're looking to replicate what we've known and call it back into being in the future. And the guides say, as long as we think that we are our history, that's what we're going to claim. That's what we're going to get. That's what we create with.
It actually simplifies things in my mind. You sort of make a decision maybe about what you want to do, and just stay on that path with these principles, and kind of don't have to worry about the rest. You just have to worry about this present and this thing where you're motivated by love, and the rest takes care of itself. I mean,
I hear it. I think you're right. When I read for people, and I do my sort of psychic work, people sometimes want to know about outcomes, and sometimes I'm very helpful. But very often the guides will say, it's not about that. It's about how you are here today and how you're engaging with this issue today, because that's what's going to shift you and move it into a higher way and into a higher relationship. So, is it going to work out with a boyfriend? Maybe, maybe not. I can go there, as a psychic and read some of that. But what's more important is, I think, how one is relating to the situation at hand and what part of you is sort of is being present for it. So, I guess it is about being here and being conscious and being aware. And then we begin to claim things to us that we require, which is what the guides would say. But, I still worry about, where I'm going to move next and, what's going to happen with this and what's going to happen with that. Most of the worry, I have to say, is an enormous waste of time. It's a way to busy myself. It's a way to exert some sense of control in the face of change. But it doesn't help me at all.
Well, and it's annoying to everyone else, too, I think, actually. So before we depart still from the subject of love, because they have so much to say about that's I feel will be a totally different world when we come to that point. And actually, you had even said at one point that they said if we knew in the world how much we were loved, the world would change. Or if everyone knew that. If everybody knew
how much they were loved, we would never. But everything would change here. They've said that. Yes.
And I actually, because I've been sort of asking the question, what is the power of love? And I get the sense that there's this incredible love, because you hear people who have had the near-death experiences or other scenarios, or certainly the way your guides talk, that there's this enormous amount of love available for us that's very powerful. And yet for some reason I feel like we haven't tapped into it yet, or we can't stay in it even if you have like an experience of this incredible love.
Yeah. I hear we don't know we're allowed to. I hear you don't know you're allowed to. That's what I hear. It's possible. You don't know that it's possible to align to this. To align to this, when you know it's possible. When you know that it's possible to align to this level of consciousness, you can begin to acclimate to it until that time. But until that time, you will assume something else. You will assume it's something else, something outside of yourself, something outside of yourself that cannot be attained. The alignment you're speaking of. The alignment you are speaking of, in many ways, is a shift of frequency. Is a shift of frequency to what is already here, to what is already here. You're not going someplace else. You're not going someplace else. The conscious love is always present. The consciousness of love is always present, but must be attended to. But must be attended to by you as you are. By you as you are. So we have to align to it. So you have to align to it. You don't go to it. You don't go to it outside of the self. Outside of the self, it is here. 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 It is here.
So when they say aligned to it. Can you just elaborate on that?
Well, tell her this, please. They're saying, tell her this, please, radios. Okay, your radios. So it's what they said before. You're all radios. What do you align to? What do you align to? What do you call into agreement with? Mm-hmm. What do you call into agreement with yourself? With yourself. What do you align with? What do you align with? You want to be aligned to fear. And if you want to be aligned to fear, that becomes your broadcast. That becomes your broadcast. And your expression is fearful. And your expression is fearful. If you wish to align to love, if you wish to align to love, claim that it can be so. Claim that it can be so. And your broadcast will shift. And your broadcast will shift, but you must be in agreement it's possible. But you must be in agreement that it's possible. It will not be so, or it will not be so. You'll be pretending. You would be pretending, and then there is no truth. And then there is no truth, the validity of your experience. The validity of your experience, the one choosing as the one choosing, is what you need to attend to, is what you need to attend to. These are not pretty concepts. These are not pretty concepts. These are ways of being expressed. These are ways of being expressed or attainable that are attainable by everyone with permission and resolve. And resolve means, or to show up for it, you are willing to show up for it, not because it's convenient, not because it's convenient. Convenience is what you like. Convenience is what you like. I want to be angry at my neighbor. I want to be angry at my neighbor for the next afternoon. For the next afternoon, I will love her tomorrow. I will love her tomorrow. And then that's what you claim, and that's what you get. And then that's what you claim, and that's what you get. That is your agreement. That is your agreement if you wish to be in love. If you wish to be in love, the first thing you must know is that nothing is excluded from it, is that nothing is excluded from it. Nothing and no one. Nothing and no one. Do you understand? They're saying, do you understand this? That is the key here.
Yeah.
That is the key here when you get to that place of awareness. When you get to that place of awareness, you are very much awake. You are very much awake to who you are and whoever it is, and who everybody is, and that is the manifestation of Christ man. And that is the manifestation of the Christ in man. That is the divine self operating as you. That is the divine self operating as you. If you understand this, and you say yes, you can claim it into being. You can claim it into being by agreement and choice. By agreement and choice, period.
It's a bit of a practice, isn't it?
Yeah.
A constant, remembrance and a practice, and just
absolutely is what I'm hearing.
Decision to do this.
Choice. They're saying choice.
Yeah. Okay. They said when we are acting in love, our song will be heard on inner planes. What do they mean by inner planes?
Well, this is my assumption. Inner planes. When I'm working telepathically, I'm working in the inner planes. Uh-huh. When I'm working with the frequency of the word, if I'm saying, I am word through the one I see before me, or I am word through the ones, watching this interview, word, I am word, and I'm sending the energy there. I'm not operating in time and space in the way that we would normally think of. The books work on people. The energy of the book was transmitted as it was being dictated, but people are picking up on it and having the direct experience of it, months or years later, depending on when they discover the books. It's still present. It has its own properties. That's inner planes work. You see, it's not just the three-dimensional reality that we are used to being in agreement with.
So I think that's a dimension that we could really come to understand so much better.
I hear we will. We will. It's time. It's time. It's present already. You just don't see it. You just don't see it. Now you're starting to see it. But the funny thing is now you're starting to see it. People are opening more and more. My opening in 87 really began sort of with an energetic experience. I started to see these lights around people. These things like fireflies. And I still see things like that, and these sort of, big orbs of light or big blobs of beautiful color that show up in the room. I was channeling in Atlanta last week, and there was this huge blue cloud that came into the room, and I kept saying, look at that. I don't know if other people saw it, but sometimes they do. And sometimes in my workshops, my guides will, or I'll do this because I can do this. You just sort of teach people the basics of how to see an aura. It's not my primary gifts, but I can do it. And people that didn't even know it was possible are saying, oh my God, there's a funnel over her head. Oh my God, there's an outline. And it's so much easier to access what I believe are part of who we naturally are. You see, I think this stuff is stuff that we can do. We didn't know we could do it. When a few people say, hey, it can be done, it stops being a big deal. And consequently, our awareness of what's beyond this reality or this dimension becomes more present. It becomes something that we can be sort of in conversation with. I mean, that's the best I understand, that I'm not a physicist. I bet they're the ones you should be interviewing about this stuff because they have the vocabulary.
Right. Oh, I don't know. Well, I think, though, that the fact that you're able to see these things and read these things, and even in talking with the guides, because for me, that's a lot of my imagination. Like I will talk. Sometimes I feel like I get a lot of clarity, and then sometimes not, and I think, oh, am I just making this up? So there's a bit of
Sure.
It can be a bit vague and abstract, that whole world.
Yeah.
Or you might think you see, something over here, and
that's the reason
wonder.
It's really helpful to do it with other people. That's why I sat in a group for 15 years or some more than that, probably in my apartment, was to have the collective experience of the energy. I mean, my guides used to come through and they'd say, then sometimes they'll still do it in groups and they'll say, everybody, receive a hand on your head, on your forehead. And everybody feels the pressure of a palm. And they'll say, do you feel this? And he goes, yes. But, if I'm alone and I feel that, I go, okay, that was my imagination.
Yeah.
If there's 25 other people having the same experience, of energy sort of moving through the body. I mean, you see, I'm not a spiritual teacher. I'm not a guru. That's just not my interest at all. But I like being participatory to the groups. And my guides are very much about people being in their own knowing and claiming their own experience. So when my guides, work with the books and with people in groups, they'll work with energy that's palpable. People get to have their own knowing of energy moving through their body or sending or receiving it. Very often they'll teach clairsentience, which is the ability to feel energy. And people are shocked at how much information they can access just sitting opposite somebody, closing their eyes and tuning in. It's very funny, but the most unlikely people sometimes, and the people that didn't think they even believed in this stuff, are the ones that will be able to say, I felt like she had a pin in her arm, and she says, I got a pin in my arm, you're absolutely right. And they're going, oh my God, that's what it felt like. Do you understand?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we just need to get used to it, get used to that whole world, or begin to walk in it. And
when conversations like this, in some ways, I think actually support people in saying, hey, maybe. And the maybe was enough for me because I didn't believe in anything, and none of it. I wanted to, I think. I had a deep yearning for a spiritual life when I was younger, but I didn't know that I could have it. It wasn't sort of on the menu.
I know.
And I'm glad in retrospect that it wasn't, because it made it important when it came for me to say yes to it. I didn't take it for granted, and it wasn't convenient. It wasn't just about feeling good. It was about sort of moving through some real challenges, and it was necessary for me to get through them.
Yeah. So I do want to ask you about that, because I think the fact that people can use this in times of desperation or just, not seeing a light on the, at the end of the tunnel. What do you tell them? I mean, how can they use it?
Well, using it, sounds like there's something like there's a trick to it, and I don't think it's that. I know what the guides teach. And what they say, there's the attunement to the frequency of the word. And this is the attunement. So if anybody's, watching this and doesn't know the books, this is what the guides say. They ask people to say, I am word through my body, word I am word. I am word through my vibration, word I am word. I am word through my knowing of myself as word, word I am word. And they say this is the attunement, body, mind, and spirit, essentially, to the vibration of the word. And the word, as they describe it, their definition, is the energy of the Creator in action. When they talk about working with the word, they talk about claiming the word to support people in changing their alignment or agreement to a situation. So they'll often say, I am word through my boss. May change your relationship with your boss, but he's not going to turn into a nicer person, but it's going to change how you're in response to this. In terms of in times of trouble, that's a much bigger teaching. In the first book, I Am the Word, there's a really important chapter called Trials, and they talk about how we're challenged sometimes. And God knows that's happened to me, many times, and I hate it. still every time it happens, But they talk about understanding that. And, I would reference the books for that.
Yeah. Okay. And speaking of the books, they say they write with the language of light.
Uh-huh. Well, they do. They have said that. They've said that the books operate on two levels. They say that there's the words on the page, which provide an intellectual context for the reader so that we understand it. The mind can comprehend it. But they also say that the real book is written in frequency, is an encoding that works with the reader to support the reader in their own realignment to what they work with. So there's all these different exercises and ways of working in the book that people can usually feel. They can feel the energy coming through. They say that's the real book. And I think it was in the first book, maybe the second, they said, we could have done this without language, but you need that still in order to be able to comprehend the passage that you're undertaking. You need to be participatory in terms of your own choice. My guides are really big on choice and free will. I mean, we can't, they're not going to do, they don't override free will. They're not allowed to. They're very clear on this. We choose. We say yes. They seem to come in and support people in their own transformation.
If they wrote it without language, what would that look like? What would that be?
What I think it would be a transmission of energy. I mean, I think that there are people that work with vibration that are probably profound, that are not giving an intellectual teaching. I mean, I've only seen Amma once, who hugs people for, 48 hours at a time. And people go there to be in the presence of that amazing love that fills the room and is transformational to people. She's working, on an energetic level, on a mass scale with people. My guides are working, and they're working through texts. They said pretty much, I'm one person. I can show up and do a workshop for a number of people, but I can't be everywhere. And the book is essentially the same attunements to the frequency, and they're working with their readers directly. So, I'm just the radio when I work. But what would a book look? What would it look like without that? I think it looks, frankly, like all of us when we're awake. Or awake is a word I don't use much, but my guides would say that if you're in alignment to this level of consciousness and you're operating at a high frequency, you're impacting everything around you and helping to lift it, because we work with co-resonance. So, you don't need an intellectual understanding. You know how you say, somebody comes in and they light up a room? Mm-hmm. They're lighting up a room. You can't really explain. It's not just charisma. It's something. Something is happening. When I was doing a lot of energy work, when I was studying healing, and I was a very dutiful student back in my early 30s, I remember once meditating, just doing all of this work all day on expanding my aura. And I remember walking into a deli in New York to go buy like an apple or something. And the two guys behind me said, "Can you feel this guy?" And I went, wow, they can feel it, but they could feel it. I mean, it was radiating. Right. And that's a level, it's palpable stuff. Yeah. And so you can serve without the language. The language does help us to understand it. Yeah. The teachings are practical.
So they say that their next teaching, or what they're moving into, is mastery, teaching mastery.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
Have you gotten there yet?
No, they're teaching the one teaching that's been coming through consistently, because this book was only finished channeling last Easter, so it's been about a year. And the teachings really were coming up until the end. So when I do workshops, they're still teaching this stuff, but then they tend to move beyond into whatever's going to be next. They're teaching creation now, and they're teaching how we're participatory to what we call into being in the physical realm. And I suppose that's a form of mastery. And they're calling that the mudra of creation, which they've been teaching now on and off for maybe about a year. I think the first time they actually taught that was here in Boulder, and I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. I don't know when the next book is coming. It's frightening to me in some ways, only because, I don't know what's next. I didn't know when they channeled the first book. They said this is the first book of 3, and I was like, yeah, right. I didn't even know it was possible. And there have been 3 books, in the series, and now it seems like there's going to be more, beyond this trilogy, and I kind of hope so.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the teachings are yet.
Well, look forward to it when it comes. Thank you so much again for being here. It's lovely to talk to you and be with you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.